Hello and welcome to Between the Rows. I'm Ed White, your host this week. Today we're going to hear about Innovation Farm and its plans now that it has new funding.
That we create this space, this commercial scale, and we are able to communicate lots of great stories about the ways in which new technologies are being implemented and integrated in a commercial farm, and the ways in which this is having a positive impact on productivity and sustainability.
We'll get an update on the container shipping crisis.
You can get containers, but the issue we're seeing, and we've been seeing it for a while, we haven't seen this quite correct yet, is that you can't get, most of the shipping lines don't want to service destinations where we want to go.
And we'll hear about friendshoring, the Freeland Doctrine, and what those terms mean for Canada's farmers and export-oriented agriculture.
But after Ukraine triumphs, and we must do everything in our power to ensure that victory comes, and comes quickly, we will quite likely continue to face a tyrannical Russia on Europe's border and powerful authoritarian regimes elsewhere. Our approach to them must be different from what it has been over the past 3 decades.
But first, a word from our sponsor.
Maybe you've had an idea about upgrading your operation. Maybe about finally getting that renovation done or buying some new equipment. Or maybe you're thinking about how you can be a bit more financially secure from season to season. Get some help making it happen by speaking with an RBC Agriculture Account Manager. Then, set up an investment plan to make even more of your ideas happen. Visit rbc.com/chartyourcourse and get started today.
Innovation Farm sounds like an interesting place, and it has interesting plans. To explain what it is and what it does and what it plans to be doing, I'm joined by Jacqueline Keena, Managing Director of Emily, the Enterprise Machine Intelligence and Learning Initiative. Hello, Jacqueline, and welcome to the show.
Nice to be connected to you.
So, can you tell us what Innovation Farm is and what it does?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Ed. Innovation Farms is a full-scale commercial farm here in Manitoba. It's about 20 minutes north of Winnipeg. And what Emily has actually done is collaborate with the grower, Rick Rutherford, who will continue to own and operate the farm as, of course, a commercial operation. But what Innovation Farms actually is it's a project that's running on or at Rutherford Farm to test and validate new technologies across the 5,500-acre farm. And what we want to do there is really raise the profile of all sorts of new technologies, be it hardware or software, and what they can do on farm from a productivity and sustainability perspective. And then the second thing that the Innovation Farm project will do is that we have a dedicated amount of space, about 100 acres this year, and maybe up to 150 or 160 in the years to come, for testing and validation space for new technologies, be it developed by researchers or startups or larger companies that have new technology that they've developed. What we want to do is provide a space for testing and validating on commercial scale. When we were working on this project in the initial phases a couple of years ago, what really came true for us, or what really rang true as we were talking to startups, people with new innovations, was that they needed access to commercial scale testing opportunities and sites to be able to test their new innovations. It is really important to have that commercial scale of data collected from these new innovations about how they actually work in the field and how they work on the scale, that the growers operate at for potential customers of these new products and services, so that they can see how it's actually going to work on their farming operation. But it's also really important for startups and really anyone with a new innovation to have that kind of testing data available as they speak to potential investors. So we knew it was really important to provide this opportunity of commercially available space at that commercial scale for new innovations. So that's the work of Innovation Farm. We're going to do lots of interesting projects on the farm. Some of them already started this past growing season. And we're also going to do a lot of work to communicate what happens on farm, because we want everyone, whether it's growers who have many decades of experience, or people that are new to the ag industry, or people that really don't know very much about agriculture at all, to become more familiar by some of the communications that we're going to do about the project. We want especially people who are not familiar with agriculture to know all of the interesting things that happen, all the ways in which agriculture is already an incredibly tech-savvy industry, so that we can increase people's awareness and hopefully attract a few more people into the industry who don't have agriculture on their radar right now.
And you recently received some substantial funding. What was it you received, and what is that going to allow you to do now?
Yes, that's right. We did make an announcement about great funding for the project, Innovation Farms at Agriculture Enlightened, our annual conference of just last week. And so we're really grateful for the support of both the federal government as well as private industry here in Manitoba and across Canada. We received $2.5 million from Prairies Can, so that's the federal government, and we're really grateful for their support to really launch this project and make it happen. And then we also received and announced about $6 million of industry support from a number of companies and organizations here in Canada. So Farm Credit Canada, Access Credit Union, Enns Brothers, John Deere Canada, as well as Rutherford Farms, and the family of Jake Enns Ag Innovation Legacy Fund. So we're really grateful for their support, and really what it allows us to do is really run this project at scale over the next couple of years. So Innovation Farms really would not exist without that support, and that's why it was such an exciting announcement to really announce the project, as well as the great support and interest that we've received from the federal government, as well as our industry partners.
And where do you hope that Innovation Farms goes? What are your hopes and dreams?
Well, our hopes and dreams really are that we do a number of things, that we create this space, this commercial scale, and we are able to communicate lots of great stories about the ways in which new technologies are being implemented and integrated in a commercial farm, and the ways in which this is having a positive impact on productivity and sustainability in production agriculture. We want to solve some of those issues for startups and new innovations that need access to commercial scale testing, so that they can keep iterating and get great new products to market and grow here in Canada. And we also want to make this an opportunity to increase people's awareness of agriculture. We know that we will need lots more people in the industry in a variety of jobs, of course, on the farm, but also all through the value chain of the industry. And so the Innovation Farm project is a really useful tool to raise people's awareness of all of the technological opportunity that exists in the industry.
Well, thank you very much for being willing to talk to us today and fill us in on this. It sounds like pretty heady stuff, and it looks like you're heading off down the path of some pretty interesting research.
That's great. Thanks very much, Ed. And as we keep going, we're always looking for more partners and collaborators, and certainly very open to have all sorts of new innovations tested and demonstrated on the farm. So we're always looking to meet new people and bring on new collaborators.
Well, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Ed.
That was Jacqueline Keena of Emily. This is Between the Rows. Pulse and special crops producers have been living in a nightmare since the pandemic struck and ocean shipping became next to impossible for those exporting their crops via container. Enormous numbers of containers were coming from Asia to Vancouver and other ports, were often and generally sent back to Asia empty, rather than picking up loads of Canadian crops. That meant exporters got stuck with huge amounts of crop they couldn't move, and farmers found they couldn't move their crops off the farm, despite high prices. To catch us up on what's happening with the container crisis, I called Greg Northey of Pulse Canada, and this is what he told me.
So global demand on shipping lines is coming down just because the various economic issues that are happening are lowering demand. So you're seeing a drop in rates for containers. So they're at this point, I was just looking last week at one of the indices. They're about 100. And so we always measure like pre-COVID versus now. And so pre-COVID, we're still about 140% higher. So, your rates, but they've dropped, but that's much better than where they were, just put it in perspective, right? So, and they're still coming down. So, an export container for us would have been around $800, $900 before COVID hit, and now it's around 2,000 or so, depending on the route, right? So,
and where is the, like, when it was in the bad time, the worst times, where did it get to?
Yeah, like 4,000. Yeah, 4,500.
Yeah,
that's for export, right? For import, it was astronomical. It was $25,000 a container coming in, right? Versus this still would have been probably about 2,000 or something before that. So it depends on import and export, but so rates are coming down, so demand's dropping. So that's good. As far as supply, it's still pretty acute in that you can get containers, but the issue we're seeing, and we've been seeing it for a while, and we haven't seen this quite correct yet, is that you can't get, most of the shipping lines don't want to service destinations where we want to go, right? Where it's the Indian subcontinent. So right now, out of Vancouver and Montreal, one shipping line is willing to move there. And where it used to be, you'd have a vessel that would go there once a week. Now it's once a month. And it's just more of a torturous route, right? So and that's still the case. And so it's just really to be honest, it's still a very, very sluggish market for containers. Like, we should be moving much, much more than when we should be, but it's not a logistics supply chain that in any way is particularly feasible. And, whether it's through Vancouver or Montreal, we've got just a huge backlog still of product, particularly out of Eastern Canada, like whether it's beans or soybeans, where months and months and months behind. So it's the really good quality product, really good harvest this year, and it's just still just backed up because there's just much less options. And so we've seen a lot move to bulk, but the reality is a lot of our sector, a lot of these crops, they only move containers: green lentils, chickpeas, fava beans, about 40% of red lentils, 50% of red lentils. And a lot of companies have built their businesses around that, and it's still really painful, but there's some hope, right, that these things are going to change, because the shipping lines are slowly coming back, because the demand is dropping just everywhere, and so they're looking for movement, and I say the big worry though is that because they can manage capacity collectively so much, it'll be just interesting to see how they do that, whether they start to blank sailings and just pull capacity out so that they can keep rates high. So it's an interesting dynamic that we'll be watching for sure.
That was Greg Northey of Pulse Canada. As if the pandemic supply chain disruptions and the container crisis weren't enough, Canada's farmers and ag exporters also have to face what appears to be the most fundamental shift in the world order since the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Open democracies relying upon global trade, like Canada, are trying to figure out their place in a world that suddenly seems less friendly, less open, and less dependable. The term friendshoring is being bandied about amongst the advanced nations of the Western world. Canada's formidable Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, has included friendshoring in a comprehensive approach she has fashioned, one compelling enough for some geopolitics experts to call it the Freeman Doctrine. Here she is sounding almost Churchillian as she addressed the Brookings Institute in Washington on October 11th.
But after Ukraine triumphs, and we must do everything in our power to ensure that victory comes and comes quickly, We will quite likely continue to face a tyrannical Russia on Europe's border and powerful authoritarian regimes elsewhere. Our approach to them must be different from what it has been over the past 3 decades. Rather than imagining that their political systems will gradually, peacefully, and enthusiastically come to resemble our own as we all grow richer together, we need to understand that authoritarian regimes are fundamentally hostile to us. Our success is an existential threat to them. That is why they have tried to subvert our democracies from within, and why we should expect them to continue to do so. We must likewise recognize that authoritarian regimes have as little fundamental respect for a rules-based order among states as they do for the rule of law within their own countries. That means we need to be cautious about our economic relations with the world's dictators and their elites. We need to make clear that it will no longer be possible to rule like Stalin, but live like Abramovich. We should continue to trade, but we should avoid strategic vulnerabilities in our supply chains and our economies more broadly.
The Western democracies have long banded together militarily to oppose belligerent non-democratic powers. It's time, Freeland says, to go further.
But we must now expand that closer cooperation to the economy. As fall turns to winter, Europe is bracing for a cold and bitter lesson in the strategic folly of economic reliance on countries whose political and moral values are inimical to our own. China's increasingly aggressive wolf diplomacy has already given many smaller democracies a foretaste of that experience. Now, for some democracies, especially the largest among us, a tempting response to these vulnerabilities will be autarky. But for most democracies, that just isn't feasible. And for all of us, the economic costs would be very high. A better alternative is what U.S. Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen has described as friendshoring, that democracies must make a conscious effort to build our supply chains through each other's economies. Where democracies must be strategically vulnerable, we should be vulnerable to each other. One way to do this, of course, is through trade agreements. Canada is proud to be the only G7 country with trade deals with every other G7 partner. But we would be happier still to give up our bragging rights and to have our feat replicated by each of our allies. And trade deals aren't enough. Going forward, we should design our government procurement and incentive programs with friendshoring in mind. The Inflation Reduction Act is a forward-thinking example of this approach. The new $7,500 tax credit to buy a new electric vehicle requires that its battery be built using critical minerals and metals produced in countries with which the U.S. has a trade agreement. Now, trade deals are one way to define who our friends are. A complementary approach, exemplified by the EU's proposed ban on imports produced with forced labor, is to identify shared values. Replicated across the world's democracies, friendshoring is a historic opportunity for our workers and our communities. For Canada and Canadian workers, and for those of our democratic allies around the world, this is an economic opportunity to attract new investment, create more good-paying jobs, and for us all to thrive in a changed global economy. It can make our economies more resilient, our supply chains true to our most deeply held principles, and protect our workers and the social safety net they depend on from unfair competition created by coercive societies and race-to-the-bottom business practices. Workers in our democracies have long understood that global trade without values-based rules to govern it made our people poorer and our countries more vulnerable. They have long known that it enriched the plutocrats, but not the people. Friendshoring is an answer to these long-standing and legitimate concerns. But if we are to tie our economies even more closely together, we must be confident that we will all follow the rules in our trade with each other, even and especially when it would be easier not to. We will friendshore more quickly and effectively if we work together to develop shared approaches and if we make an explicit commitment to each other to implement them. And crucially, we must then be prepared to spend some domestic political capital in the name of economic security for our democratic partners. The EU set a powerful example during the COVID pandemic when European vaccine makers honored their contracts with non-European allies. Canada remembers. Canada must and will show similar generosity in fast-tracking, for example, the energy and mining projects our allies need to heat their homes and to manufacture electric vehicles.
Freeland says the advanced Western nations need to bring developing democratic nations into the economic alliance.
Friendshoring should also mean standing up for each other in the face of economic bullying from the world's dictators, an approach Anders Rasmussen and Ivo Dalder have described as an economic version of NATO's Article 5. We cannot allow Lithuania to be coerced over its policy towards Taiwan, or South Korean companies to be harassed and boycotted in retaliation against legitimate national security decisions taken by Seoul. A commitment to support each other in the face of such economic strong-arming is the best way to ensure it doesn't happen again. The second pillar, and the hardest question that a friendshoring approach must grapple with, is our attitude towards the in-between countries. It's easy enough to make the case for deepened economic ties between the countries of the non-geographic West, bound as we already are by close political and often military alliances, NATO allies, and the rich industrialized democracies of the Indo-Pacific. But what about the other countries of Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America? Their experience of the end of history era was different from ours, and the reaction of some to the invasion of Ukraine has accordingly been more ambivalent. Where should they fit into a world in which some of the battle lines that were erased 33 years ago have been redrawn? Our lines of democracies must be open. Friendshoring can't be a closed club, be it the G7 or NATO or the Five Eyes. It cannot be only for rich countries or only for historic partners. It must be open to the democracies of the Caribbean, of Latin America, of Africa, of the Middle East, and of Asia. Open to any country that shares our values and is willing to play by collectively agreed upon rules.
But where does this leave Canadian farmers? Agriculture has long been the most global of Canada's industries, trading into virtually every country on the planet. How will any general move into friendshoring affect Canada's farmers and ag exporters? I asked Greg Northey of Pulse Canada about that.
I know with the grains and pulses and oil seeds and meat that we sell, I mean, we're going to friends and, maybe sometimes what appear to be non-friends and everybody else in the world. How does the drive to friendshoring, is it affecting, our export industry, in ag and are we, how does that, all this talk about it, how does that affect how we're, I guess, looking at our future exports?
Yeah, well, It's well, I'd say for at least from the oil, like when you see a lot of the crush capacity and all that kind of thing announced, I mean that is in essence part of and even in the full sector the same, where you see these processing plants be put up, whether it's in the U.S. or Canada, as far as the pea protein, pea starch, and those kinds of things. That kind of domestic processing is been pushing this for a long time, but it's sort of that the concept of friendshoring, where you're basically reducing your reliance on these markets that may close at any moment. And then ultimately for Canada, it's making if we want to be considered one of those, quote unquote friends with a group of countries around the world who, want to be in that sort of whatever friendship circle or whatever, I don't know what the proper term would be. It is about, okay, what kind of requirements are they going to have as far as for the products they want to sell? So, we need to make sure that we remain attractive, that we don't have these massive delays, for countries that need a product, need to fill their factory with a grain or whatever, or a mill, or overseas where it's those kind of delays. And I'd say the other thing that's going to be really important in that kind of scenario, this idea of friendly supply chains, is whenever you start to talk about regulatory issues and market access issues and those kind of things, where we have that kind of alignment globally on those regulations. So I think it's very similar to where we've already been focused. And the expectation is that Canada would benefit from something like this, because we adhere to trade rules, very closely. We're active players in WTO and other trade deals. We have a lot of different trade deals with a lot of different people, and so we've had a general focus towards free and open trade as much as possible. And so we should be in a good space. We should have to capitalize on any kind of real push from countries to do friendshoring.
That's all we have for this week. Please join us again next week for another edition of Between the Rows. I'm Ed White, and I was your host.
Maybe you've had an idea about upgrading your operation. Maybe about finally getting that renovation done or buying some new equipment. Or maybe you're thinking about how you can be a bit more financially secure from season to season. Get some help making it happen by speaking with an RBC Agriculture Account Manager. Then, set up an investment plan to make even more of your ideas happen. Visit rbc.com/chartyourcourse and get started today.